Thank you everyone for joining today and welcome. I'm Andy Schiffer, the Director of Marketing at Saving Nature, and I'm joined by our Executive Director, Aaron Willigan. Thank you for spending your time with us for a truly special conversation. As many of you know, at Saving Nature, we work to restore and reconnect fragmented ecosystems across the globe, places where wildlife teeters on the brink of extinction and communities rely on forests for water, climate stability, and a future. But we don't do this work alone. It's only possible through deep-rooted partnerships with local conservation leaders on the ground. Tonight, we're honored to speak with one of those leaders, someone whose vision, passion, and persistence have helped bring a devastated landscape back to life. Nicholas Locke is the president of REGUA in Brazil, Brazil's Atlantic Forest. He's been at the heart of this effort for nearly 3 decades, turning an old family farm into one of the world's most inspiring models of restoration, rewilding, and community engagement. From reintroducing tapirs and curassows to nurturing 700,000 seedlings and welcoming birders from around the world, Nicholas and Regua are writing a new story for the Atlantic Forest, one of hope, biodiversity, and resilience. Regua is one of Saving Nature's most impactful partners, and together we're building wildlife corridors that reconnect habitats and protect the last strongholds uh, of species found nowhere else on Earth. We'll spend the next 45 minutes diving into this incredible work, from biodiversity to birding to forest monitoring. And we'll also be taking your questions at the end. So feel free to drop them in the chat as we go. Please join me in welcoming Nicholas Locke. Nicholas, how are you doing today?
Very well, Andy, very well. Good evening, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak to you all and show you a little bit of what we're doing here.
I'm honored to chat with you, and I thought maybe we'd just start at the beginning about your personal journey and dive into, can you take us back to the beginning? What inspired you, to transform your family's land into a conservation reserve?
Well, we'll start. This is for those who haven't visited us, this is a property that was purchased by my great-grandfather, Hilmer Werner. He did very well with his textile industry, and he was very fortunate to buy this place in 1907. And really, it's went through the various generations. My grandmother was always interested in planting trees, and my father was interested in planting trees. And this property here with the backdrop of the Serra de Mar mountain range is really very beautiful indeed. We're basically, Regua is around about 30, Regua is in a watershed. And the bottom of the watershed, this river, which is the equivalent of Rio Grande in obviously in Spanish, but you have this, you're familiar with Rio Grande. And Guapiaçu means big river in Tupi Guarani. And it was a very important river back in early days. And the lowlands are only about 30 meters above sea level. And this water that rushes off this mountain range falls into this river, which is taken to the Guanabara Bay at the back of Rio de Janeiro. It's extremely beautiful area that always impacts people who come and see it. And in terms of landscape and just its sheer beauty, I suppose I was always attracted to it, and I felt very much in love with it. And this connection with the family really helped me in lowering the anchor in this sort of philosophical way and wanting to do something and protect this for a long period of time. And that's basically how the whole project started, Andy.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like it kind of just became like your mission, like over time, and just you became more and more passionate, as you dove into the land and experienced it. Uh, and let me just go to the next slide. I thought maybe we could talk about your, you know, how it's a massive undertaking of itself, REGUA. Just it's incredibly, you know, challenging to work in conservation and to do the undertaking that you were doing. You know, what were some of the earliest challenges you faced?
Well, we started off, this photograph will show people the lie of the land, as it were. And at the back, these blue mountains are the mountains of the Serra de Mar, which is itself the tail end of a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Serra de Mar Mountains. And that really is the edge of the continental plateau, which is mostly Brazil. Our vision really started with a want to try and protect the forests of this large estate that was purchased by my great-grandfather. And we were very fortunate to receive a British biologist who knew his birds. And he came and stayed with us back in 1996. And really, he started walking these forests and finding a considerable array of birds, many of which are endemic, that showed that the area was very well preserved. And that really started us to think of how we could really protect the forests on this slope, on this mountainous slope. So using birds as an indicator of species, we started thinking about the various ways. We are very fortunate in Brazil to have this legal figure called an RPPN, which is basically, it's a private reserve that you can write your property, you can write it in your property's deeds. And the early challenge was really to figure out whether that was the right way to go ahead, to make an RPPN, because one had the impression that you were handing your own land to the government. And the family was a little resistant to this back in the very early 90s and early and late 90s. One of the surprises it was finding a very rare species on this lowland. A number of birders would come along together with this British biologist, and they had sightings of a bird called the Rio de Janeiro antwren, Mimotherula fluminensis. This was a bird that had been found in the very early 90s by a Brazilian professor at the university. And he described the species, and no one had ever seen this in the forests. And we had these birders coming along, and they thought that they saw this particular bird. And it really was quite a surprise for us, because they started, people started commenting on the fact that this bird was to be seen at REGUA. And still to today, in the books, all the literature on the bird species of the Atlantic rainforest, REGUA is quoted as sort of having seen this bird or having this bird on the property, even though it has really not been seen and not been photographed or anything of that nature. So there were the early challenges: is how do you start something? This was a very new model of conservation, and RPPN appeared a little not too strong a figure, and slightly worried about handing it over to the government in terms of creating this private park. But and some of the setbacks, which I know you're gonna, we talked about, you're gonna mention. Some of the setbacks was once we started creating this model of land purchase to turn into conservation through setting up this organization called Reserva Guapiaçu Ecological Reserve, was in talking to landowners and then reaching to conclusions as to what the price is, what the area was, how much they were prepared to sell this for. This was very early on. It's always a difficult and torturous subject for many people to talk about the value of their land. And the very first purchases that REGUA undertook required a sort of getting used to this language of how can we go forward? How can we build this together? And I think that was one of the surprises is how we actually managed to start negotiating with land purchase, through land purchase, creating this very large reserve.
It's just unbelievable. There's so much to unpack there from the origins to the challenges to that bird. So it still hasn't been photographed.
It still hasn't, yeah, it still hasn't been photographed. We have, today we have 489 species of birds that have been found here within the REGUA Reserve. And there's still a few more that live on the very high elevated parts of the reserve. So it's perfectly possible to think of getting up to about 500 species of birds. 133 of these are endemic. And that is a considerable number. But that's about 4.5% of all the world's bird species can be found in this one place. And really, that is quite extraordinary, isn't it?
It's just so amazing. And, the mysteries of this place, it's kind of overshadowed by the Amazon in some ways. And actually, my next slide was a little bit about that because the Atlantic forest is often overshadowed by the Amazon, but it's clearly just as important. You listed all these bird species, all these interesting facts about the endemic life there. Can you give us a sense of how biodiverse, it is? Maybe some mammals, some other bird facts, some of your favorite species that maybe have returned over the years thanks to your effort and been reintroduced to the reserve.
Correct. Correct. I'll comment on the biodiversity of the area. The Atlantic rainforest, many millions of years ago, as I was saying, it was the Brazilian plateau. It was actually connected to the Atlantic rainforest. But then they split up with climate change and various natural phenomena that the world went through, and ice ages and things like that. And we have, in between the Atlantic rainforest and the Amazon region, they're both vast regions. So you can imagine there was a super huge area when they were all connected. But in the middle appeared the Cerrado, which is a very different area. It's smaller stunted trees, and a very much drier climate. And that really encompasses most of the central plateau of Brazil. And the Atlantic rainforest is this forest type, it's a biome, of course, that stretches from virtually the equator all down to 30 degrees south. So latitude spread of almost 30 degrees. And that we have different ocean currents up to about halfway. We have an ocean current that comes from the South Pole, from Argentina, from the South Pole waters. And this brings a lot of humidity to the lower areas. And the northern part of the Atlantic rainforest, we're roughly at 22 on the Tropic of Capricorn. It starts off getting slightly drier as you go north. And of course, you can imagine that the Atlantic rainforest is hemmed in by the continental wall of these great mountains called the Serra do Mar, the mountains of the sea. And so the Atlantic rainforest is spread over about original area spread over 1.5 million square kilometers, which is a vast area. And in between these two latitudes, and in this height difference of basically between the sort of sand dunes and the lofty granite domes with just bromeliads, and you have the parrots, you get a vast number of microhabitats. And that with seasonal changes as we move down the latitudes, has really sort of created this huge diversity, is responsible for this massive plant and animal diversity. And we look at the Brazilian continent as being more or less stationary when it was connected to the Gondwana land. And so even though India and the South Pole, Antarctica, the India, Australia, and Africa later split apart from this supercontinent, the actual continent of South America has remained fairly static. And that, I think, has led to this enormous diversity. And you can still see animal species connected. Some of the marsupials in Australia, for example, we have marsupials here. And some of these, some occasional plant species are moving around. But basically, you have this supercontinent of huge diversity that really has almost had a constant line of speciation and species diversity. So today we have the Atlantic rainforest is known for over 20,000 vascular plant species. And in
Wow,
fact, we actually found one new
big
species for
number.
science of the day. It really is. It really is. And the other thing, of course, is that it's got a mega diversity in insects, in birds, amphibians, and all these other animals. It really is incredible, very rich indeed. But of course, yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off. I just think it's
No,
incredible what you've done and the fact that you inherited this land and made it this place where animals can return and be safe and protected and grow. And I know Stuart, our founder, Stuart Pym at Saving Nature, really resonated when working with you about the fact that there's so much endemic life there being protected. It's a biodiversity hotspot. And for me it's just so inspiring to hear kind of your efforts. I actually had a question for you regarding how you managed to go about this. It's one of the largest forest restorers in Rio de Janeiro state. Could you walk us through the restoration process from seed collection to planting to maintenance, just so we can
yeah.
get an idea of what it's like to be you?
Well, so I hope nobody's bothered by the sound of the dogs barking in the distance.
Well, I could barely hear them, but
Oh,
you
great.
guys can
Okay.
let me know if that.
Well, a lot of basically once we started, we had an idea. Once we had the sort of the plan on the drawing board, we basically looked at what were the most important programs that we could implement here in order to have a sort of resonation of these programs that would lead to conservation. So we looked at things that we obviously the NGO created the council. This council had members who came along and discussed this. We were very inspired by Stuart Pym and Clinton Jenkins, because these were the first scientists who were talking about conservation priorities in the Rio de Janeiro state, which is where we are. Rio de Janeiro state is one of the smallest states of Brazil, but yet it's the same size as Costa Rica. But he was talking all about this. He was already involved in the Golden Lion Tamarind project. I'd heard about him. And he came and visited us in 2008 when we were starting this reintroduction of the red-billed curassow. And of course, it's the talk. It's talking to people who know and give you the sense of the importance and the justification for all this, which is what really triggered us to be able to do these actions. So once we had these 5 programs very clearly established, protect what was there, reach out to your local community to be able to tell them exactly why it was important to conserve forests, to be able to restore, to be able to research, to understand how the building bricks were put together, and lastly, trying to develop a sort of economic line and activity through visitation and the lodge. Once we had all these programs in
Wow.
place, it was really about implementing them and taking them forward. And when you meet really iconic people who sort of like give you the sort of the appreciation of what you're trying to do, then you feel like really working hard. And I would say that really was one of the most important contributions that everybody gave to us was their praise and the confidence to go forward. And planting trees is something which I knew very well when I was telling you that my grandmother loved trees and my father
Right.
loves trees. So it was all about collecting seeds, putting them into the nursery. We had a very, very old-fashioned nursery just made of bamboo frames with a little bit of shading. And that was enough to be able to put these seeds into boxes with a composite material, see them starting to sprout, transfer them into little bags, and then take them out and plant the very first seedlings in the very first areas that we wanted to connect. So we were always basically trying to connect two existing forest fragments so that they would join and become one forest fragment. Then we also wanted to, and the very first time we were planting trees, we'd never planted in scale before, and that was a huge challenge because I was always used to planting trees in the garden and doing larger and watering trees in the dry season is always quite difficult. But we never really we always wanted to. Once we started getting the first success, once the trees started growing, we realized that we were onto a good thing there, Andy. And the trees responded, and that gives you huge optimism in moving forward and reaching for ever larger quantities of trees to be planted. I
Wow.
noticed the question about natural regeneration. Luke asked the question about natural regeneration. This is something which works very well in certain areas, but in other areas, actually, full-scale planting is a real great option. And Luke, one of the reasons we really like working with tree planting is that it involves and generates employment. And one of the things, if you look in just look in the historical sense, our development cycle is really all about accessing land to be able to plant on and cutting down existing forests. And we see this even in the Amazon today. And all of a sudden, we're starting to say the opposite. We're starting to tell everybody that we need to put the forest back because they provide really crucial ecosystem services for us, not only not only protecting biodiversity, but also to try and fix the weather change, with the climate change, to try and secure water in terms of water security. And really in terms also of food security as well, because by repairing land, which is very degraded, and by actually planting this up, it means that we can actually have land for agriculture in the future, should we need it. But it is the best way to be able to repair land is by actually planting. And we found that planting trees was one way to really filter funds into the local community. And by getting a job from planting, working in the nursery, out in the field planting and caring for trees, we provide for 23 jobs, which is really important.
It's just so cool that not only helps nature, but it helps the economies as well of local people, not just people back, in the States but people that directly live nearby. I was wondering, how do you monitor the success long term? What does it look like what do you look for to know like a forest is thriving again?
That's a good question. I've been planting trees now for maybe 50 years of my life. And there's a point whereby you notice that the forest as an ecosystem, as an organism, starts kicking in, it starts working. You can always tell what is a healthy forest by the indication is of the number of small seedlings that are naturally growing on the ground. And that indicates that the trees were healthy, they produced flower, they were pollinated, they produced a seed, and those seeds are fertile. And that's how you really tell. And we have a very young forest. We've been planting them now for about 25 years. And we notice that more plants come in, different plants from the ones that we planted. And we've been measuring that over time. And that's very interesting as well, because as you remember, I said that there are over 20,000 plant species, but we have 1,800 tree species of that 20,000. That means that you can play, you can work and you can play around with the mixes and the mixtures of the seedlings that you're planting. But I think a lot of it is just observation and using your best principles. I'm a farmer, and I come from a farming background, so that's what I studied at college. And it's a question of getting systems to grow, getting systems to work. And if you're an engineer, you do that with mechanics. And if you're a farmer, you get things to grow. That's what you do. And getting forests to grow is just like getting any other crop to grow. But after about, to answer your question more fully, I would say after about 5 years, you really know that that forest is going well. That forest is on the curve upwards. No, I think that will helps.
Sorry,
yeah.
Continue, please.
Oh no, I was just going to say that someone asked. Somebody asked. I'm picking up the questions here. How distant are these forests from where people live? This is a very interesting question too. So we have done, our watershed is roughly 100,000 acres. And we have mapped all this, we've studied all this, we've created a conservation strategy, which tells us that roughly 3/4 of this area, it has no real agricultural vocation. They are farms. Historically, there have been farms that have knocked down the forest on small hills, and they've drained the land and they've put it into pastures, etc. But they're not really prime agricultural land, and we have livestock farming here has been hard hit by the recession and the larger areas of planting in the center of the country. So what we're seeing here is a slight abandon of areas, and labor has become quite expensive, which means that maintaining small areas of farmland is becoming very expensive. And that has really been a window of opportunity for us to secure and to continue securing land, buying it from these people who really want to get out and have a small house. And that is, so we've created a sort of a target area of roughly 75,000 acres, of which we are now working with about 40,000 acres altogether. We've secured maybe 2/3 of that, and then we're working with like-minded landowners who actually don't want to sell their property. They like their forest, and they're happy that we can send our rangers into it. So that works very well.
Wow.
And what I particularly like, and where I'm trying to get to the point, is that for the forest to work well, to be able to maintain a high level of resilience, it's really scale that we need. And getting people out living by themselves in very far away areas, inaccessible areas, is not really good for the forest ecosystem. And people actually don't like living by themselves in the middle of the forest. So we actually use this so the way we think of a landscape, our watershed, is a sort of mosaic of agricultural area, which is obviously is highly prized and provides lots of jobs. We also think that it's important to have your small villages. We don't have big towns inside of our watershed, and these little villages, there may be about 10 in the watershed. They are fine. These are small urban centers which maintain the tradition where people live, and they like that. But to really try and get this idea of connectivity, which is what Stuart Pym and Clinton have always talked about. The idea is to reach to scale by connecting all existing islands of fragments of different sizes and pooling them all together so they work as one big organism. And so our watershed really is about sort of almost
I'll
like
hold you to about the watershed, because we're going to get into that.
Okay, great.
Shortly about the watershed, and
we won't talk about. We won't mention the watershed. But having this sort of horseshoe around the little villages and agricultural land, actually works very well. And what I'd like to think is that we actually have what we call an intelligent landscape, a landscape that offers opportunities, livelihoods, and doesn't create a pressure on the quality and the functionality of these tropical forests that are here. And this intelligent landscape is the one that provides these eco services, which you want to talk about.
Amazing. Yeah. Yeah, that is my next question. And first of all, can we appreciate the masked duck? I'm so jealous that it's in your area because I would love to see that. Just looks absolutely stunning. You can obviously see your eco lodge, and you're gonna have to help me with that bird. But I saw it on your website and it looked beautiful, so I just had to add it. But my first question for you um, about birding. Obviously, you mentioned there's over 450 species of birds found there, and I'm wondering what makes this area so special for bird watchers. Why do birds come to it? Out of all the areas in the world, like what draws them to this place? What makes it a paradise for birds?
Uh, okay, I hope I answered. Just to finish off that bit of forest restoration,
Okay, go
maybe
ahead.
some of your listeners would like to know that we have 750 different matrix trees that we have georeferenced, so we collect these fairly regularly. And it's quite interesting to know that some trees don't produce seed every year. They produce seed maybe every 10 or even 15 years. They go dormant without
Wow.
producing seed. Yeah, so we generally collect between 150 and 200 species regularly every year, and then we produce these in the nursery. Our nursery has a capacity for producing 50 to 100,000 seedlings a year. And our restoration team, we can also plant between 50 and 80 hectares a year. That's what we feel comfortable with. We don't want to make a massive industry out of this, but we want to make something constant that provides jobs long term for our local population. The maintenance is absolutely essential, and this if you're a farmer, there's a particular moment when you have to do the cleaning of your potatoes, your wheat, or your corn. And it's the same thing with trees. They need a special moment when they're starting to grow, that they don't want too many weeds around them. And we're able to look after them. We've been called a reference site and have up between 90 and 95% success rate. And in fact,
Wow.
some of the areas that we plant, even 120 species, we've actually got papers from researchers who come in, and they've shown that as many more are coming in from brought in by bats, brought in by birds, new species that hadn't been planted before, showing that the area still has a very high resilience. And that's what really, aside what I was saying, what these references in our culture and in our research who have given us praise in the past, but now actually seeing that how nature works, it also encourages us to keep on. But coming back to your bird
That's
question,
fascinating. I'm glad you answered that. Wow.
it's quite an amazing affair. And visiting is really, I think, a number of the guests here tonight, I think, have been here at REGUA. And I think it's people come here to see the birds. We've had many groups from the ABA, from the Audubons, and people come to see Atlantic rainforest bird species, because we're only 2 hours from a major airport, an international airport, and within 2 hours you can drop down, you can drop your bags at the lodge and go birding in a multitude of different sites that we've reconstructed. Things like a wetland where this masked duck is to be found, and even the boat-billed heron, which is really, there's not that many sites for it as well. But all the rarities that you associate with this particular biome can be found very in the forests around, in the existing forests, and then we take tours to go to the very peaks of these mountains where things like the gray-winged cotinga can be found, the black and gold cotingas, the hooded berry eater, all these particular, all the tyrannulates, the flycatchers, the elanias, all these particularly some of the mannequins, and just today we were taking people out to another area. So everything is very handy, and people can just stay in one lodge. They can spend roughly 5 or 6 days with us and see about 300 different bird species, which is a great. It's a great and stay at a place that is really contributing towards global conservation of the
I was going to ask about
habitat.
that.
Yeah.
Because I think when I went into learning about saving nature, and I was shocked about how many of these places we work with have an ecotourism business and the role it plays in conservation. So my question to you is, how does it contribute to your mission financially, but also through community engagement?
Okay, that's a very important question because really today it's very important that conservation projects, which are causing a major change in the makeup of the landscape, as I was drawing your attention to before. It's very important for the local organization to work with the local community and to bring them on board and try to for them to appreciate the difficulties and the hard work it is in repairing landscapes so they become functional ecosystems. There are many unsuccessful cases of restoration in tropical areas. It's not that easy. And when you have very biodiverse areas, when you have very scarred and damaged landscapes with degraded soils, it takes a lot of time to be able to pull these areas back and getting the trees to grow and bringing in the new other species and bringing the bird and the fauna that is associated with this area. But so the community is very important, and what we've been working with specifically, my wife Raquel has started working maybe 20 years ago, is through a broad social outreach program through community education, and that's reaching to young kids so that they know that what we're trying to do isn't something which is not nuclear science or anything like that. But they also like to feel involved and part of the solution,
Wow.
so they can gain some benefits. And we've been supported now. Our education program has been very large when we were supported by one of the oil giants here, the Petrobras. But we decided that we wanted something smaller, more concentrating with the communities here and working only in our watershed. And so we've now attracted the likes of Mitsubishi, who have given us a nice sum to be able to bring more or less 2,500 kids to the reserve every year. We have events directed at local communities, so they have open days. And then we have a really nice program called Young Rangers. And these are kids that are between 12 and 14, 16, who come in for a weekly program, weekly event, a weekly date that they learn different things about what we do, why we're doing it, and also imparting things like making handicraft, because these are kids who are very forest savvy. They really know how to be in the forest, but they lack the tools to be able to go into some of the tools needed for social mobilization, and this sort of program helps them boost their confidence, shows that we all live in one world, we don't live in separate worlds, and it's a question of just doing some minor adjustments, and they benefit from this, and they use this on their CVs when they try and get their first jobs, and it really has been remarkable how successful this is. So these kids are actually grateful, and in a way, we've been able. We don't do this to get their gratitude, but it helps them. And as a token, they actually start to understand where we're coming from. What is the paradigm that we're trying to change? Why are we working towards a greener world. And is this trying to stop progress, or is this in harmony with progress? And these are things that we bring in, and that works very well. And just last year, we also got a grant from a German development bank called IKI. And through Cologne University, we're providing courses to different publics. So we have landowners, we have government officials, we have NGO, and we do capacity building courses for them, for women and for students and even for landowners. These are the people who actually impact the area because they are local people who have their farms, their houses, and by telling them in part of this capacity building course and why this valley is important, why this watershed or this catchment is important. I know that you want to talk about that later, but why water resources are so important for huge numbers of people. Yeah.
Because I really think people should see like what it looks like over there and what you're talking about. And also, we already had a question from Bill, similarly about water, saying, "Does forested land increase local rainfall and water supply?" And I would just like to add to that real quick before we get the answer. I know how much of a major role you play in water protection for millions of people with REGUA. How does your work tie into climate resilience and watershed conservation? And the floor is yours. But it's so important what you're doing. I'm floored. So thank you so much for all this work, and love to hear you.
No, that's great. I think you may have because this is one of the really very first slides of the restoration of the wetland. The wetland now is quite different from the slide. The trees have grown all around.
Oh wow!
Yeah, no, this is actually a slide from 2007. So.
Oh my gosh! So what's it look like now?
Yeah, no, man. It looks quite amazing now.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Well, that's great. It means
a lot more trees.
Don't worry. But you can these have now, this whole area has changed beyond belief. It is now an example of how we look after how wetlands are an important they're an important feature of any landscape because first of all, wetlands on a large scale, they have their fauna and flora that are associated, and they become huge banks of life. Obviously, where water accumulates, you have all the nymph stages of so many insects, which then form the basis of the food chain. And having that food chain complete is what we're really trying to reach to. Mm-hmm. So if you're having fish and amphibians, having your birds, having your mammals, all these insects that come out of the water from their larval stage will then fill the air, and that becomes just a food bank for bats and birds and every kind. So these wetlands are absolutely an integral part of an intelligent landscape. And nowadays, people have coined this idea of sponge cities, so that cities actually have almost like inbuilt wetlands around them, and so they also can regulate. They can regulate temperature. They can regulate some of the effects of heat, and then they can it's the same thing, of course. But having trees and having all this greenery actually improves the quality and actually affects the psyche of most of the people that live in cities.
Wow. It's so interesting that you're able to contribute so much, just not even to you, but to like the city in itself from your work and how it plays in. Selfishly, and probably I think a lot of people also want to hear about. I love the animals in your area. They're just stunning. Some of the most stunning in the world, if not the most. Do you have a favorite moment or memory from seeing one of these species return?
Well, you asked, I think one of the questions you asked was about sort of how to evaluate And these things can all be measured, which I think is really it's all a science. Science becomes a bit of an art as well, which is quite nice. The idea of that art becomes science, science becomes art. And you can measure plots. Erin is always asking me about measuring the trees and the sizes and the DBH. And we're able to get forest plots and measure the success rates of the growth rates. And we also have a groups that come in and they measure the aspect of the animal populations inside these areas of forest at different stages as they grow. So we even have people from Earthwatch coming. We just had a whole group from a New York student, and yeah, that's it, Dale. That link works well. And we've had students from New York City, and they like to chip in looking at some of the rodents that are found along trails, and that you can start evaluating how your forest is growing. And we can also do camera traps, and we have enormous amount of camera traps in various stages of the forest, from right on the top of the mountains where the forests are best protected to the lower areas. And we've even recorded 23 different pumas, mountain lions. Now, 23, you can say, Nicholas, I don't believe you can. How can you tell the difference? Yeah. Well, they're all slightly different. We had a student from Lisbon, and he all these different pumas, and we found obviously we found 7 females and 14 males, and all the males are different. They've got scars, or they've got some of them have lost sight. One of them was blind in one eye. We called him Scar. And all these, and they're different shapes and sizes, so you can really tell these guys apart. And the females obviously are a slightly different shape and smaller head. And we've caught them with young. So really, the camera traps becomes a very valuable tool in measuring frequency and measuring the population of various animals and what you have. So whilst we're still at a very, I would say, even though we're only 20 odd years into making this reserve and monitoring it, 24 years now, we're not only doing some sort of studies on what's here, but we're also doing ecological studies to see how animals disperse. This is it's fascinating. I find it fascinating because
it is fascinating.
You love your birds, and the birds and the animals. Well, part of the animal. What happens is when a couple they mate, they bring up their young, and they tell their young that they have to go to a different territory because they can't all compete for the same food source. And so it becomes it becomes important to be able to plant forests so that you can create new habitats, so that these the new generation, the younger generation, can move into these areas and into these new areas. And this is what we find. We find slowly the makeup of an area that was previously very degraded or in pasture. Slowly, we've had this around that wetland, which had originally had about 20 species before we made the wetland. Now it's got 240 species around it. So wow. It shows you this sort of constant 3-dimensional evolution, which I think is just so exciting because, as I say, art and science they fuse together, and it becomes really a beautiful canvas to work on.
Well, that's so interesting about the pumas, because I just remember as a novice learning that a puma being the top predator coming back to an ecosystem is a sign that all the other important steps along the way have been accomplished to the point where a predator could sustain itself on that level. So it's just fascinating to hear that you have 30 that you've found so far, along with these other animals. I wanted to briefly discuss our partnership, REGUA and Save. Can you speak about how it began?
Yes. Well, just quickly, you asked for my favorite animal, and I didn't tell you, and you had this beautiful picture of the tapir.
I
With
love
all these,
African paper.
we've planted over 1,200 acres of new forest, and this arrangement of working these programs has reduced hunting to virtually eliminated hunting from the area. And we were very fortunate. We tried reintroducing in 2005. We started freeing and releasing some red-billed curassow. Now, red-billed curassows are a bird you're familiar with. Maybe some of the others are not, but it's the same. It's the equivalent of a sort of southeastern turkey. It's a terrestrial bird, doesn't fly very long distances, but it is a bird that has been lost and became locally extinct. And we tried this in 2005. We received about 60 birds. We released them over a period of 2 years in a soft release, which means that the door open, you give them a sort of, you help them with food, and basically they try and get themselves back into nature. But it's really hard because most of these animals are bred in captive breeding programs, and so they're very used to people. And of course, they don't realize that a white-necked hawk will just feed on it. Some of these even small rodents will go and try and feed on unwitting birds. So we didn't do very well with that one. But in 2017, and we thought we never wanted to do a release program again. We don't want to be associated with a failure. Out of course, it came a lot of information, really good information. What these birds, like we didn't know that red-billed curassows walk 2 kilometers a day, and that it's a really interesting thing. If you remember, all our listeners will remember that Robinson Crusoe, when he arrived at that island, the first thing he did was he walked the entire perimeter of the island to try and see if there was anybody there. And that's really one of the problems that's facing a lot of the fauna today, is that areas are becoming so reduced, so impacted, that they're starting to leave to try and find if there's any other one to mate with. And you probably saw that really interesting video that we got of a maned wolf on top of one of the higher parts of the reserve. And a clear indication that this species, which is mostly synonymous with the Cerrado drier forest, was in a complete different area. Maybe he'd been sort of a young that had been expelled and trying to find a mate, which is a pretty it's a pretty grim story if you look at it in that light. But one of the things so in 2017, we received the interest from, we'd been able to accumulate more land. We received a group that were interested in releasing tapirs in the reserve. And
Beautiful.
they were very excited, and they brought 3 tapirs. We said, yes, we'd love to. We made a release pen, about 2 acres each, and we made these 2 release pens. We released them. Sadly, the male fought with the young calf of the female that had been brought with him, and the young one just disappeared. We still don't know to today where he went. And the male, when we tried to fit a radio collar on him, he was given a tranquilizer dart, and he fell into a stream and inhaled a bit of water, which led to him catching pneumonia, and he shortly died afterwards. So within about the first 3 months, we'd lost 2 of the 3 tapirs. And we thought, wow, what's going to happen? This is terrible. And very fortunately, the female had been sired, so she came with a young. We started bringing some other tapirs, and today we've brought in about 19 tapirs to inhabit this lowlands. We lost about 8. We lost 8, but we gained 7 births, and all these births have been remarkably successful. And altogether, the region is this project of the release of these tapirs is caused international news, and is regarded as being one of the most successful cases for the lowland tapir here in southeast Brazil. So it's a really great story. Sorry, and I must get back to saving nature.
It's really fascinating to hear about these animals. Like, as a person, and tapir, like I didn't realize how cute they were as babies. I always saw them as adults. Here's a baby, they have their stripes. Anyways, we'll get to the next question. Yes. So, can you speak about how the partnership with Saving Nature began?
Yeah, we've I've told you how important it was to meet the great Stuart Pym and having him coming here, and of course we tried to interest him because he's such a so respected around the world, and his studies are really well regarded, and so he became interested in us, and I think that he was naturally interested in the golden, done a lot of work with the Golden Lion Tamarin project, and I think he liked what we were trying to do and understood what we were trying to do, and I think that's really what started the whole of the Saving Nature program. And on our very first, we've been interested in securing. We started through land purchase, and we tried to find one property that would be the perfect corridor, natural. It's all in pasture, so it'd be a property to secure and make a corridor. And Stuart tried to help us secure this through a donor in Europe, but DOB Ecology. But unfortunately, the project changed halfway, and in fact, they preferred working with the Golden Lion Tamarin project. Gave them their very first piece of land, so Stuart was really instrumental in for that to occur. But then the DOB Ecology also helped us a couple of years later and helped us secure 3 properties here, which has been absolutely fantastic. So Stuart's been behind the scenes in helping us raise funds for land purchase. And Brian and Liz from Texas have been, I'm sure they're listening, I can't see them, but they've been incredibly generous and bought us the Brian and Liz corridor, which is now just an amazing corridor that's linking 2 areas, 2 very important and precious areas within the watershed. And that's been very successful as well. And since then, Stuart's been helping us purchase other areas as well. And growing from strength to strength, I think. But the Saving Nature is really way ahead of avant-garde in terms of creating the modeling that is needed to make these sort of nature reserves work. And Saving Nature doesn't only work with us, it works with organizations in Colombia and Indonesia. And I really, it's amazing. I think Stuart's traveling in Kenya now at this very moment.
Right, yeah. He's the busy guy.
Yeah, he doesn't stop, no? And I really take my hat off to people who are work so hard for the greater good, for the collective good, for all of us, for us humanity. And I think that is something which gives me the pride and the need to try and correspond to the trust that he gave us. So I like this. I like this. I think this works well for both of us.
As you can see, there's a beautiful before and after some of the great work you've done and we've done together.
We've done together, yeah.
I wanted to close and then open up for any questions you guys may have. Well, what's your vision for REGUA in 10 years?
Oh, that's a very interesting question too. We were at a workshop run by ABC, and Bennett Hennessy is also a very good ecologist, and he was running this, and he got a number of Brazilian institutions together, and one of the things we were looking at is what is happening. Do an analysis, do a sort of print card of what's happening now and where do you see yourselves in 10 years. And at this very moment, we have a sort of, our project is actually still, to run the project which is now, as I was saying, it's about 40,000 acres. Our project only costs about $500,000 a year to run. And we get about 30% of this income is raised through tourism. So tourism is a very important component which ends up raising funds for operational costs, which is very important for most projects because it's really difficult to tie this into projects, specific projects. 30% of our income also comes from restoration projects. There are a number of salaries that are involved, but it's really important for an NGO, from any NGO, to filter funds into the local economy, as we were talking earlier. And the restoration is one way to be able to do that. And the other 40% is a mixture of donations and projects, and that is pretty amazing for a small institution like REGUA. And because of course no conservation project really has their shares up in Wall Street or Nasdaq. It's conservation is still something which we all need to contribute to, and because it isn't something that is financially, economically sustainable. And when we were talking to Bennett, in 10 years' time, we think that if we're able to secure more land, we want to try and reach this 75% of the watershed. We think that in 10 years' time, we're going to be able to do that, because we're just clipped to halfway already. Things are getting easier in a certain sense. People are liking what we're doing. They can trust us. They're creating confidence. They're getting a really good message. And I think we'll reach that. And I don't see it being very long. In a few years' time, we'll start reaching out for eco-service payments based on the water that is supplied to 2.5 million people downstream. So this watershed is very important. It's strategic for the state in terms of drinking water for 2.5 million people. And I think that the work that we're doing in the science, in the conservation work, through creating RPPNs, through restoration, is actually improving the quality of the water, creating this sort of sponge watershed that actually can be paid a modest sum for maintaining all these forests. And so in 10 years' time, I still see tourism increasing. I think we are gradually having more and more, we're starting to have more and more students. Our research program reaches to over 1,000 students coming every year. We have 2,500 kids that come as part of the education program. We have local visitors, and we also have international visitors. Some of about 7,000 people a year have come and visit us, which some say is a lot, some think it's very little, but it is still, we're living next to major conurbations of about 10 million people only an hour and a half away. And our legacy, which is basically what drives me, is to leave a green area for the future of the state of Rio de Janeiro, looking after this very precious biodiversity, having returned the trust that all the donors and various donors have given us through land purchase, to leave this green area for the state of Rio de Janeiro as a blueprint, and create the sort of modeling that inspires other people to do this elsewhere. And that is what keeps me well fueled, and I hope that we can contribute towards climate change. We can reach to complement the resilience of natural ecosystems and their functionality and water security. And I see this as the sort of economic model that will just make it so that it'll be able to have funding and a bright future. That's the way I see it, Andy.
Well, let's hope that we could get there. It's 10 years away, and I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, how do we get there? And we want to keep it positive. I know there's a lot of terrible things you could look at going on in the environment, but my last question for you is two-part. What keeps you hopeful, even when all these challenges are happening? And what's the most impactful way someone watching tonight can support your work?
Well, okay. Well, I'm a very optimistic person, and I think it's easy to get very depressed looking at what's happening around the world. But I think people can make a massive impact at a local level. And what gives me hope is the fact that a project like this has received so much support from all around the world. And that gives me hope that I think we need more projects like this, and I think it's possible to do. And we've received so much, with such a warm reception from the population nearby. It's something which they like, something they value, because fundamentally we're looking after their home. And I think if you put things in that sort of light, people are receptive to that. People obviously, this is a very curious answer, perhaps, to your question, because uh, maybe any project manager would like to say that the fauna and the flora is returning, the trees are growing, and that gives him hope. What I think of a hope is that the people responsible, the people that most benefit from this, actually change their values and change the way they see the natural world. And it gives me hope that from the reaction of the people that are visiting us, and that, as I said, have supported us, I see that that change does happen. And I like to think that as a result, this amazing natural world all around us will benefit from that change of heart, that change of use, the change that we can will look towards a sustainable world in which we reconcile some of our actions and actually look towards protection of nature in a harmonious way, within an equilibrium. I think that's what gives me hope. That younger kids
Wow.
like it, benefit from it, want to go into college, do biology, are inspired. People writing to us, people love liking what we do. More people coming to our workshops, capacity building. Every single people want to be looked after, and I think that people never knew how to work with the environment. And maybe this is an example of how you work with people and you benefit the environment. Yeah, rather than making it just it's only an environment and not and free of people. I think that looking at both together is the way forward. Um, and possibly how people can help. Well, coming here is always really great. Telling people about what we do is fantastic. If you would like to support us, we have a large portfolio of properties that we want to keep on buying. But making small grants to say through Saving Nature only charges a small token administrational fee. Feel free to help us through that. Every dollar is well spent. We have really low salaries. We try and get the money to the local population, and we're getting positive change. We're making positive changes. So if anybody feels that they'd like to make a donation, I think the best way is through the Saving Nature Foundation. And I think that's the way that we can build this together. And you have my contact details. People can write to me. I'm very receptive. I like to write to people. If people want to have talks on Zooms, take this back to their local group, their local conservation group, we can do that. I might be traveling to the States in
Right?
October, September. I have to go and visit my aunt who lives in Austin, Texas. So if anybody's in the southern part there, I'm sure I'll see Brian and Liz again, and maybe we can give a presentation to the one that I wasn't able to go the last time. But look, we're all in this together. It's fantastic. I really want to thank each and every one of you for having tuned in to watch Andy's program, to having received this invitation and making the effort to listen to us talking. And many of you have visited, and many of you know me. But and I think that I am optimistic. I see changes possible, and I think treating a little bit at a time is the way to forward. In spite of all the problems that we hear about, we can all make the difference, every single one of us. Thank you.
Nicholas, thank you so much for sharing your story and your incredible work with us tonight. Your commitment to protecting one of the world's most endangered forests and nurturing back to life, I just so inspiring. To everyone listening, though, if you'd like to support Nicholas and Regula and the work we're doing together through Saving Nature, you can scan this QR code I put up, or reach out to me, and I can send you the link. Every acre counts, every tree counts. So, But thank you again for joining us, and we're going to answer some questions now. But I just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to watch this and listen. And thank you, Nicholas. Nicholas, if it's all right with you, could we answer some of the questions?
Absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely.
great. Okay, great. And thank you so much for joining if you have to hop off. Warren asked, what strategies have you found most effective in balancing the goals of reforestation and conservation with the needs and interests of local communities?
I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer that so directly, Glenn, but I'll try. We specialize in restoring habitat. So there are various ways to restore. One of the earlier questions was on natural restoration. Natural restoration is just abandoning areas and allowing them to go back. It is possible, but in Brazil, it's really hard. We have quite a strict forestry code, and we find very often, and we find that market forces alternate, and sometimes land that has been sort of abandoned all of a sudden gets cut down everything because it hasn't formed forest. And to be protected, it needs to be a forest. And so they have this sort of like and natural regeneration just takes so long in certain areas. They're very fire prone because a lot of grasses come up. And so because they don't employ people, because we find that it is not the most efficient way of reaching towards forests. We have planted forests, and within 12, 15 years, we have matched the quality, we've improved the quality of natural regenerated forests that have been abandoned maybe 60 years. So we really accelerate the process, bring in really great quality trees, and we accelerate the process in which we stabilize the question of forest functionality in this relationship between the integrated relationship between fauna and flora. So we like that method. In terms of, we don't deal with agroforestry, not that we choose not to, it's just that it isn't something that occurs with great ease. And one of our prime ambitions is to create RPPN, this type of protected forest status that the government concedes, and that protects rights into the deeds of every property, this private park. As I was started on the conversation, we were quite reticent to hand over all the land in the beginning to make this land, but now we see this as an ideal situation of creating gradually more and more RPPN, and it actually fixes the state of the land. It's written into the deed, so no one can change it. But one of the conditions that we actually plant forests, and we can't use, and because it uses integral protection, it means you can't take anything out. And so agroforestry isn't something you can really incorporate within the RPPN. I think locals, they don't mind what we do. We've taken great care not to go into conflict with local communities, and we've been planting areas that really are very tired and desolate, degraded soils, things that just don't go back by themselves. And I think we're starting to see a change through our education program, through the fact that we're actually creating a more beautiful landscape. And beauty is something which I always love to think of Doug Tompkins for reading about what he did. He was fascinated with this idea of beauty. And it's something which people don't like talking or are embarrassed to talk about, but a beautiful landscape is something which we have here. And Doug was fascinated with. I never had the opportunity or the pleasure of meeting him, but I read in his biography that he was fascinated with beauty, natural beauty. And that's something which we emulate too. And I think by creating a more beautiful watershed, people are coming here and they're putting a value onto forests that are growing, natural habitats that are functional, that are working, rivers and things like that. And I think there's a net gain. So if I answer the question, Glenn, is that we work side by side with our local community, never in conflict, and trying to find ways of employing them, generating tourism, things like that in this region. That is a win-win situation for them. I hope I've answered your question.
Well, Warren actually said that, but Glenn
Oh, word,
said
right.
you're very inspiring. So, you got Glenn in the chat too, saying nice things. If anyone else wants to drop a question, feel free to do that. If you guys need to hop off, that's fine. I'm just bathing in your knowledge right now, and just while you're here, Dale has a question about that rare bird that you guys spotted that kind of inspired you in the beginning of your journey, that was never seen. So what he wants to know, has there been any audio recordings of that bird?
No, it hasn't, Dale. No, that's very interesting. It put us on the map because at the time, neotropical birding, there's a magazine, there's a neotropical birding club, and we had various members come, and I've got written testimonials saying that they'd seen the bird here. But we did several years of mist netting, and we caught what was the silvery flanked, or no, it's the white flanked antbird, which was very similar, white flanked ant wren, sorry, and it's very similar. And people then thought that it could be a slight change of that one that led them to believe that they had seen the Rio de Janeiro ant wren. Now, the Rio de Janeiro ant wren has been DNA'd. It was found by Professor Luis Gonzaga of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. It remains in his collection, and it has been DNA'd, and they found that it is a new species. So no one's ever found it. People have tried to look for it in the area where it was found, slightly south of us, about 30K, about 20 miles south of us, but no one's ever come up with it again. You have to remember that the habitat loss due to urban encroachment has really changed a lot of the areas near cities. And that's one of the reasons we have this enormous drive to try and secure as much within our watershed as possible, because we are within an hour and a half of roughly 10 million people. And it's still possible with the land that we have to be able to secure another 2,500 hectares, raising that's another 6,000 acres. So it's possible to get up there within our 10 years. That's our target at any rate. And there was an earlier question whether there were any indigenous folk here. We never had indigenous folk here. This particular area of the Guapiaçu, the Tupi Guarani, lived only on the coast because it was really hard to be able to eke out a living from capturing animals and hunting. Hunting was, for the Tupi Guarani, was very difficult. Most of the animals here are nocturnal, which makes it really hard to capture them. For indigenous folk to capture them. And so most of the indigenous folk lived on the coastal areas where they were eating lots of shellfish, and that is the large quantity of archaeological digs that have shown where all these communities live. And we, at the back of the Guanabara Bay, we had the mangroves, and then further inland, because we're not very high off the sea level, we had these freshwater waterlogged forests, which are called, basically it's a species called Tapirs casanoides, which are they just love this. There are only a handful of species that live in totally waterlogged soils. One of them being the Louisiana swamp cypress. But we have this, and mangroves, of course, but this tapir also lived in this situation. And they had the golden lion tamarin at the back of the bay. They had all these, lots of the black hooded ant wren is believed to have lived in this habitat, and the festoons of orchids and bromeliads. And this habitat, very unfortunately, was considered very disease prone with malaria, yellow fever, dengue. And so they were ravagely drained back in the 1940s. And so we were one of the last, this Guapiaçu watershed is one of the last areas to be drained. There's still no original habitat left, I mean, maybe just half an acre of it or so. That gives us, we take some material and we're able to propagate that, and then we're now creating our new wetland forest because the diseases are no longer here. So we can do that, and we're trying to use this to try and show people what the first, like the First Nations, but the first vegetations was like in this particular area.
Wow. It's so fascinating to learn about your work. And I just can't thank you enough for not just answering the questions, but staying to answer everyone else's burning questions.
Oh, that's great. We
It's
love
been
it.
a very informative conversation. And I just want to thank you for your work again and for
Okay.
being a true guardian of the Atlantic forest.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Andy. And it's the whole team that's with me. It's about 43 people who work here full time, and there's some people who work spare time. The many students, the many donors who have helped us have made this project a really inspirational area that really looks to value nature, to put a value on trees, to put a value on water, value on a species, and trying to find a way forward in this rather difficult world in which we live in. This difficult times in which we live in.
Well,
But
your
we can do it.
optimism is very refreshing, and I'm sure I speak for everyone when we appreciate the work you do and appreciate you for coming on and talking to us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you
Well,
so
thank
much,
you.
everyone. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for everybody for listening on. Thank you, Chris and Cole, and thank you for everyone who's. I'm just reading the names that come up,
Yeah.
so I'm just.
Thank
It's
you.
wonderful.
Thank you.
So many
Thank you. Yeah.
great people on and so many familiar names.
Yeah, well, I am. So anybody wants to come, just book their flights. We'll look after you and show you 300 bird species and plant a tree here. Come and see some of these rare tree species. They're really they're very inspiring. Well, thank you,
you,
Bill.
Bill.
That's really great.
Thank you, Bill. Everyone, thank you so much. I'm going to end it here. And if you guys have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me or Nicholas or anyone at Saving Nature, and we'll get those answered. And I'll follow up with more information from the call, as well as a later recording of this whole thing, so you could share it if you would like. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nicholas. Everyone, have a great rest of your night and a great weekend.
Great. Bye bye then. Good night. Have a great weekend.
Bye.